Welcome back to the studio. In a recent video we talked about the value of thread, and we're going to do a little bit of a continuation on that topic in the middle of this video. But today we're going to be talking about the difference between a drill sergeant and a spirit guide. And it's always your option to choose which one of these two companions you're going to have in the studio with you. I choose a spirit guide. And I'm going to pull the camera in and give you a look at a couple designs, and then we're going to talk about the two. In the beginning of Urban Elements, Patricia Ritter was the sole designer for the company, and she's the creator. And she started getting into Panto designs because she came from a design background, and she wasn't happy with some of the designs that were out there when she started into beginning quilting. So she started designing her own Pantos, and this is an example of one of the earlier Pantos. It's called Pumpkin Patch, and in the Panto you can see here there was a section of the design that you needed to backtrack, and some people have gotten the impression that you had to backtrack exactly on this line, and this became a stumbling block for some people. What I would say is that any Panto design is meant to be a spirit guide to lead you through the process of creating a specific type of design. And in this way, this doesn't have to be sewn identical on the line. There are variations of doing this, and as long as you repeat that variation throughout the process of your quilting, what you're doing is creating a design theme yourself. You're adding your style or your imprint to a design. There are some people who feel like they have to have a drill sergeant in the room yelling at them every time they go off of the line, or perhaps a nun with a ruler smacking your knuckles. But the designs are not intended to be mastery. There's not going to be a quilt designer of this pattern in your room with you after you finish telling people all the places that you messed up. We just want to guide you softly through the process of creating this design. As I said, this was a beginning pattern. It was one of the earlier designs, and this was the methodology that she used to show how to create that unfurling stem. Now, over time, she learned that some people found this to be a stumbling block, and here's a sample of Daisy Doodle border, and you can see in this pattern, and this is a tearaway. This is a one-time use for either domestic or long-arm machine. But you can see where we backtracked. We just intentionally offset the design so that as you continue, what you get is a ribbon effect. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with this concept. It actually is very beautiful. So if you implement this mentality to this type of loop, you see that you haven't detracted from the design in any way. They're just design options, and they're meant to guide you through a beautiful and graceful pattern. So I'm going to show this on the long arm today, and I also am going to show you that this is a self-print pattern. I just purchased the pattern today and downloaded it. This, if you printed off one copy of this pattern, this is exactly what you'd get, these 2 pages. And you can see here the instructions say to cut along the dotted line. And if we do that, we have, let's see, I want to make sure I do this right. Overlapping design, cut along the dotted line. Okay, you can see that I've cut the line here off of this particular page, and you just overlap the design where you've done the cutting, and you can see where the design overlaps. And then you could either use a glue stick or some tape to tape your pattern together. And also on this edge, you can see where the pattern gets cut off a little bit. If you went ahead and trimmed that, you can see how that would connect, and there's a little bit of an overlap here. But if you cut off that little bit of a line, you could see where it would overlap. And so every single copy that you make gives you this, and you would simply print out as many copies of that as you need to create the full-size Panto. I've already done a pretty good section of this self-print. It's already loaded on my table, so I'll show you that. And then we're going to show you a couple different samples. I'm going to try and stitch it out exactly, and then I'm going to stitch out a copy of it where I've intentionally gone off of the line in my own way. And I'm going to also try and do a couple with two different kinds of thread. Last time we talked about using high contrast or low contrast thread. So my sample is going to be done in a high contrast thread. It's a variegated thread today. But then I'm also going to do a sample, since my fabric is white, I'm going to do a sample with white thread and show you how little mistakes show when you use a thread that blends into the fabric. So let's move the camera over and we'll show you our setup. I have my glasses on because I'm going to have to use them when I'm sewing. But I wanted to also show you another important thing, and that is I'm doing a sample today, and so I'm not going to sample on a quilt that I slaved over to make. They're too hard. So what I've done, and I do this quite regularly, I will purchase plain fabric when it's on sale at Joann's, or I have a coupon. This is just 108-inch white, I don't even know if it's Kona, it's just white fabric. It was the cheapest white fabric, but it was still a quality good enough that I would actually use it if I needed white. So it's not just gauze. But I have white fabric on the top, I have the same fabric on the backing, and I also have purchased batting that I use for doing samples like this when it's on sale. I know all of these things do have a cost associated with them, but they don't have all the labor associated with practicing on my quilt or somebody else's quilt. Also, when I'm finished with this, I could cut this up into sections and make dog beds for the local shelter or something. But I just use white fabric. I have it put on the frame just the way I normally would, and that's how we're going to do our sample today. You can see that I have my self-print Panto loaded on the table underneath my Pantograph grids. I don't really need to do any edit marks, but the Pantograph grid does keep the paper lying flat. If I needed to make any editing marks on the beginning or ending, top or bottom, I could do that with the Pantograph grids and a wet erase marker. But I don't really have to do any of those. But what I will say, when I get to this, I'm going to do something a little different here. Well, I'm going to do it on the second one, which is this one. I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to try and do this one as exact as possible, pretending I have a drill sergeant in the room. And then on this one, I'm going to let my spirit guide just follow through and create something a little more whimsical than what the actual design is, because it was never intended for you to sew it exactly as it is. It was just meant to be a guideline, just a little wisp that goes out to be a pumpkin vine tendril or a leaf tendril. So I'm going to go ahead and move the camera to the front so you could see as I'm stitching, and I will tell you when I'm going to switch to the drill sergeant to the spirit guide. Okay, I have my thread pulled up, and I'm going to go ahead and start stitching. And the first one I'm going to do, the first section, is going to be me trying to follow the design as closely as possible. And please note that I'm not going to be flying through the design. When you're just learning, it's okay to go slow. If the machine is traveling too fast, then lower your manual speed. But if you have it on any kind of stitch regulation, it should be moving at the same speed you are, so you don't have to feel like you're rushing. So here I am going to start stitching now. Now that's me trying to stay exactly on the line, and I'm sure you can see that I wasn't very successful. And it's a little bit stressful to do that. Here I'm going to come up to a free-spirit design. And that was me allowing myself the freedom to just get the essence of the design and not worry exactly about being directly on top of that line with the laser light. Whenever you're doing stitching, the one thing that you want to think about is that your eye is always a little bit ahead of where the laser light is on the pantograph. So you're just trying to breeze ahead with peripheral vision. You're trying to follow the exact line of the panto. And you can see that there really isn't a whole lot of difference from when I tried to stay exactly on the line and when I just let myself go and get the essence of it. So you get like an intertwining ribbon or a tendril, which doesn't detract from the pumpkin design at all. You can see with the variegated thread, there's a couple of little mistakes here that don't look very pretty, but I'm going to go ahead and switch out the machine to cream thread and let you see the stitching on that. And you'll still see some of the design, but you won't see the mistakes as much. So I'm going to go ahead and switch the thread out now. As you can see, I changed my mind. I'm not even going to go to a pure white. Because it's a pumpkin, I'm going to use this peach color. And you can see there's still some value to that, but when it's on the quilt, it doesn't show up that much. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one on and see how this stitches out. I have tried both with the machine headlight on and off, and it doesn't seem to make much of a difference in the visibility as I exactly stitch, but after the machine light passes you'll be able to see some of the stitching on the pattern. So just bear with me as we start. As you can see, I've used the light peach thread here on the white background. The quilting still shows up really well, but where I've made mistakes, you can't really see them as pronounced as you would have if I had used the variegated thread. You can see those are much more pronounced, but still the pattern shows through really clearly. So this is just the difference when you choose a high contrast thread and a low contrast thread. Also, I hope you can see, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. I know that makes a funny grinding noise when I do that. But the two places that have that swirl, by giving myself the freedom not to backtrack exactly, I've created a beautiful tendril, a beautiful ribbon effect on those elements without driving myself crazy. It doesn't detract from the design at all. It all has that same whimsical feel, and that's because I allowed my spirit guide to lead me through the process. So I don't think I'm going to try it with white. I don't even know if it will show up much at all. I think this very light peach was a perfect example of a lower contrast thread. There still is some contrast here, but it's not overpowering. And by quilting in this way, your quilting design certainly shows up, but it doesn't amplify your mistakes. I think if I were to continue on this design, the area that I would focus on was trying to get really nice curves on my pumpkins, but I wouldn't stress myself out over it because pumpkins, again, are organic, and pumpkins themselves are not perfectly round. But that is something that I would work on myself, but I wouldn't beat myself up over it because I love this pattern. Just to reiterate, the point that we're trying to make today is that there's no drill sergeant that's going to come and check your work and make sure that you've backtracked exactly on these lines. If you're thinking that you have to do that, then you're misinterpreting our intentions with these designs. Here you can see that we've eliminated that process of a single line in the design because we know you're going to go off of the line. It's only natural. Even the designer of this pattern would do the exact same thing as this. It wouldn't look like this. This isn't even a skill level necessarily. It's just impossible almost to go unless this were a digital design, and it is, in this case, it wouldn't be. So really, you're just going to come out and just go back. This is more like what it's going to look like each time that you do that, and that is our intention as you do it. It's always going to have a little ribbon effect, the thickness of a tendril, and that's the way that it was intended. We weren't intending you to be absolutely on top of that line twice because it really would take a digital operation or a very, very talented quilter to get exactly on that every time that design came up. So remember, it's a spirit guide, not a drilled sergeant. So that is our video about drill sergeants and spirit guide. I think you can tell from the feeling that I hope my studio presents is that spirit guide is always the option I would choose. I know way back that I am an imperfect quilter, but I'm very happy with my work and my progress, even when it shows slight flaws in its production. I also want to thank all of the designers that work for Urban Elements. There are over 34 different designers who produce the Pantograph edge-to-edge block corner designs that you see on the website. All of the designs are copyright, and whenever you purchase a design, whether it's a self-print, paper, or digital, that designer gets a royalty from the sale of that item. Many of our designers, this is their sole livelihood that they use to support themselves and their family. So I appreciate all the work that they put into designing these designs for us. They're constantly adding more designs. You can see that on the website. And I want to, say thank you to Patricia Ritter for starting the entire enterprise many, many years ago. I can't believe that she's come so far, but I'm really proud of her and her work. So thank you for joining us today. I hope you will join us back again for our next video. And if you have any comments, leave them below, and we hope to see you soon.